Okay, hi Kim Fay. You're joining us from Detroit. Tell me about your work.
Um, well, I'm an abstract expressionist. My childhood years, I actually lived in New York with my family, and my dad was a painter, an abstract painter, kept a studio back then. I
Mhm.
got dragged around to all the museums and whatnot in the city. And is the second I met Willem de Kooning, Jackson Pollock, Helen Frankenthaler, it was love at first sight. I fell completely in love with them, and it's been like the best relationship I've ever been in. They never let me down, and
Wow,
they
that's
just
interesting.
they completely made sense to me. Like as
So
soon as I saw it, I just thought these are my people.
yeah, okay. So basically you got your kind of introduction to art from your dad.
Yes,
And was your dad also an abstract painter, or was he a
yes, he was.
Yeah, okay. And so he hauled you around the museums, and then you got into making art.
Yes, and then he
Right.
made abstracts while I was a kid. So he kept a studio and he worked in oils, and I still love that smell of linseed oil. I walk into a studio where an artist is painting with oils, I'm just in heaven because
Yeah, yeah.
I love the smell.
All right. So your relationship with your dad has been quite important in in your work, in your practice.
Profoundly, profoundly. He's everything. He was my biggest cheerleader, my inspiration, my spark, my you
Yeah.
know, you know,
Yeah.
raison d'être.
Right. And he's inspired some of your most recent work, I understand.
Yes, it's been quite as we've talked about, it's been quite a transition from he was diagnosed with lung cancer the end of 2017 and then passed a little bit before the pandemic. So I lost him and was just starting to, I mean, not that you ever acclimate to that kind of loss, but just starting to acclimate to that loss when we went into the pandemic. So my work is usually about me working out whatever's going on in my life will come out. I think it's impossible to not for work not to be very personal. And I think it needs to be in order to be good. There has to be something very personal about it. And there's a willingness to be vulnerable, I
Hmm.
think, to make work that resonates.
Yeah.
So the work I was executing or were doing at that time had to do with my search for peace to try to get back to the light. It was a very dark period, and I was just working that out. And I called the series Sanctuary because I always feel really good in the studio. It's the one place where it's very meditative, it's serene, it's calm. I really
Hmm.
enjoy it. Everything else goes away. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time it is. It's a beautiful thing when I'm
Yeah.
working.
Yeah.
Um, so
So it was a way of kind of the work that you produced at that time during lockdown was a kind of working through of your feelings about the loss of your father. Have you sold all of that work, or have you kept it? Do you have
most of
examples?
it's gone,
Right,
which is
right,
really strange. Almost
okay,
all of it's gone except one piece that's currently in a show
right.
downtown Detroit. So we'll see. I'm surprised that one hasn't sold. People really love it.
Yeah.
So
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I do wonder about work that's so personal like that, which has so much meaning for you or for an artist when they're producing it, like how you can let it go.
not right away.
Hmm.
I know when I'm ready. Like there's times where people tell me they like a piece or something, and I can tell like, nah, I'm not ready to let that go yet.
Right, right.
Um, I think when I became comfortable letting the work go was when I moved into another series, which is the one behind me, that is called Genesis. The series is a Genesis series about coming out of the pandemic, about the changes that we've all been through that I think we're irrevocably changed as humanity has changed.
Hmm.
We went through all that together. I mean, my losing my dad was very individual and personal, but the pandemic and everything that was incited through that was a global experience. And
Mm.
now that we're on the other side of it, I feel like as a collective community, we're not the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we're reborn, and who are we now,
Yeah.
going forward?
Can you just pan the camera around so that we can have a
Sure.
look at this? So this is one in a series, you say,
Yes, that I've
right?
just started. It's pretty new. This series has a lot more shape to it. I think the sanctuary pieces were considerably more nebulous.
Right.
Um,
Right.
more ethereal. These are starting to shape. They have more form. There's similarity in terms of composition. I'm a big fan of negative space. I always like to have space that rests. I don't need every single corner to be marked or have energy or something like that. I think that there needs to be, um, that positive negative balance a little bit between that.
Right. And do you always work in this color palette, or is this a particular direction for this series?
Well, when I was working, the two paintings I made, I had a solo show. My father passed in June. I had a solo show in October, and I had already made quite a bit of work, obviously. But the last two pictures that I made for that show, there was absolutely no color at all. Color had
Mhm.
completely drained from my work.
Mm,
And now it's
interesting.
starting to come back. So it's still coming from a very, very soft monochromatic palette into I'm introducing some color now, and I think that has something to do with the rebirth too, like kind of coming back to life, and I'm coming
Mhm.
back to color.
Mm,
So I'm a big fan
that's
of
really interesting.
suddenly into sap green, and I really can't explain why.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you don't have to because it just comes out, doesn't it?
Yes.
And over your because how long have you been? Should we you could can I see your face again?
Yeah. Right.
Um
That's fine.
how,
Hi.
so you've been practicing as a an artist. Well, you've been making art since you were a kid with your dad, but like how long would you say that you've been practicing as an artist or professionally?
No, I have to say 30 years. 30
Sorry.
years.
I
A
mean,
long time.
okay, and so during that time, how do you? I mean, this is a sort of big question, but how do you feel like your work has kind of developed? I mean, have the colors changed, the way that you've engaged with line and form and so on? Do you feel like that's kind of developed in particular ways?
Dramatically.
Mm,
When I first started, I think I was completely guilty of just smearing paint around, not really
right.
understanding, excuse me, abstraction and make what it takes to make a good one.
Mm,
Um, I really bought into the whole. I mean, abstract expressionism is expressive, and of course, those artists had bigger studios. They could get into the scale, right? I don't have the capacity to work on the scale they work in.
hmm.
Um, but a lot of just really bright colors and you know move very loose, spontaneous marks, things like that, but not much construction in terms of the
Mm,
way of the composition was organized or thought. I think it was almost art therapy more than it was making art.
right.
And it was actually through teaching that I started to develop the language. Um, and since I have to communicate to other people on how to construct an abstract, I got better at it myself
Hmm.
through that language, like seeing and communicating what's involved in a successful abstraction.
Mm,
So it's really changed dramatically from
right.
when I first started.
Yeah, interesting. I'd love to see some of your earlier work actually, just to sort of compare, like, how you've kind of developed over time, actually.
Yeah,
Maybe you can send me some images. I don't know whether you've got any, but just, and
there might be some in there. I don't know if
yeah, maybe.
yeah,
Um,
it's very de Kooning, Pollock, that sort of stuff, very
right,
just,
right.
yeah, just
Yeah, sort
loose.
of what you were
Mhm.
seeing and then sort of trying to work with what you knew until you developed your own kind of
Correct.
language, right?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. I'm going to try and keep this kind of short and stuff, but I did
Okay.
want to ask you about about the art scene in Detroit,
Yes,
because you have a Substack, and
I do have a Substack. Yes.
you write about the art scene in Detroit. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, I've been an art writer since 2015. I was invited to write for a publication that it was in print, so obviously it didn't last, sadly. And then that turned into something else, and then eventually started writing for the Detroit Art Review. I
Mm,
wrote for them for 2 years. They're really the only publication, they're strictly online, but they're the only publication that reviews art shows in Detroit. And I've
right.
been since we mentioned, I've been painting professionally for 30 years. So I've been a part of the community for that long.
Hmm.
And most of the work and the artists and the galleries were not being covered. I mean, it's the vast amount of shows that weren't being covered was crazy.
Yeah.
So I don't feel like the one publication was adequate
Mm,
in describing what's really going on here, which is there's a tremendous amount of talent, the depth and the vastness of what's happening here.
mm,
Feel very passionate about my community.
mm.
So
It's
I launched the Substack to try to give a broader, more democratic view,
yeah.
accurate view of what's happening.
It's interesting actually, because I'm based in the UK, and it's
Mhm.
obviously a much smaller art scene than in America, where actually just the regions and it's just vastness of the country.
Yes,
And when I think about American art, obviously I just think about New York, LA,
yep,
the big scenes, but actually
sure.
what reading your Substack has kind of shown me is just how rich the art scene is in so many kind of, well, certainly in Detroit, but that must be also the case in other regional centers in the USA.
I would certainly agree with that. I
Yeah.
travel a lot too.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure that what y'all get is going to be New York and LA. That's where the
Mm,
top of the food chain exists.
mm,
But it doesn't mean that there isn't being made all over. And I think it's important to show that and the importance of it and it makes a community. I mean, Detroit went through that bankruptcy years ago, the first
yeah.
municipality to ever file bankruptcy, and they had threatened to sell off key works from the Detroit Institute of Arts to try to discharge this debt, or whatever.
Mm,
And most people are like, yeah, we'll sell it, whatever. Well, you can't really do that to a city. I mean, if you don't have a cultural center, then we might as well be Las Vegas. I mean, then you're just feral, without this cultural anchor.
yeah.
And we have a world-class collection here, it's spectacular. I just wrote about the Van Gogh exhibition
Yeah.
that is
I
just
read
out
it.
of this world.
Hmm.
But that's really, just the tip of the iceberg, and that trickles down. And then, of course,
Yeah.
Chicago's got fantastic artwork, and I've even been to Texas a few times. You don't even think of Texas as being art. Of course, I go to Austin, and anyone in Texas will tell you that's not really Texas, right? I'm not going to
Yeah, yeah.
Texas.
I like
But,
that.
I think there's a really big art community in Dallas. They're all over. I
Mm,
think Portland's got a really nice art hub. There's art being made all over. So
yeah.
I really appreciate you, coming in and jumping on and noticing this, because I just think Detroit, the fabric of Detroit, the creative fabric is so diverse
Hmm.
and talented that I'm thrilled to be able to put that forward.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you say about, quite often goes unacknowledged or underacknowledged, just how important the kind of creative sector is to a thriving community and a thriving city. And like you say, well, Las Vegas is known for other stuff, isn't it? But I
Yes.
mean, just a different kind of kettle of fish, really. We're not. I mean, I actually don't know what the art scene's like in Las Vegas, but just thinking about him, how important. I mean, certainly here in Bristol in the UK, you know, we've got a huge artist community, and you know, it's known for it in the UK as well, like as a sort of center of artistic excellence, and that really helps to create the kind of vibe of this city. I think, I mean, you can see it all over the walls for a start. It's a big graffiti town, but
Right.
you know, it's just really, really important, isn't it? So listen, we're gonna have to wrap up because you know,
Okay,
like I said, this is just a kind of little bite-sized intro to your work. But
sure.
thank you so much for showing me your work and for talking about it today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you. This has been wonderful.
Great.
I'm happy to meet all of your people and your audience. And if I ever make it back over the pond one of these days, I'll have to stop by and check
Oh,
your
you
scene
will?
out. So it
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
fantastic.
you will. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Cool.